The Cold War produced some of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in human history. While we often think of espionage in terms of high-tech surveillance, secret codes, and dangerous missions, some of the most effective intelligence gathering happened in the most mundane places imaginable: bars, cafes, and casual social gatherings. Soviet intelligence officers didn't need to break into secure facilities or plant bugs in embassy walls to gather critical military secrets. They had something far more powerful: a deep understanding of human psychology and a technique so subtle that their targets never realized. They were being interrogated. This technique allowed them to extract classified information from American military personnel, defense contractors, and government officials who would have never consciously betrayed their country. These weren't traitors. They were ordinary people who thought they were just having a friendly conversation. The method was called elicitation, and it remains one of the most effective intelligence gathering techniques ever developed. Understanding how it worked reveals something profound about human nature and why we all more vulnerable to manipulation than we'd like to believe. The Bangkok bar scene. Let me paint you a picture of how this actually worked in practice. It's 1965. An American submarine has just docked in Bangkok, Thailand, after months at sea. The crew, mostly young men in their late teens and early 20s, are eager to enjoy their shore leave. They head to the bars and entertainment districts that cater to military personnel. Among the crowd is a man who looks like he could be a local businessman or perhaps a tourist. He's wearing casual clothes, maybe a colorful aloha shirt. He's friendly, speaks good English, and seems genuinely interested in having a conversation. He buys a round of drinks to the young American sailors. He's just a friendly guy at a bar. They have no idea he's a trained Soviet intelligence officer. He doesn't ask about their submarine. He doesn't inquire about military operations. He doesn't request any classified information. In fact, he barely asks any questions at all. Instead, he makes statements. Incorrect statements. Statements designed to trigger a very specific psychological response. The propeller example, here's how a typical interaction would unfold. The Soviet operative, after some casual conversation about sports or women or whatever young sailors want to talk about, casually mentions submarines. He says something like, "You know, I read that the new German submarines are faster than the American ones because their propellers are 22 feet in diameter. The American submarine propellers are only 18 feet. Now, this statement is completely wrong, but that's exactly the point. The young sailor, who has spent months working on an American submarine, who knows the actual specifications, and who was probably a bit drunk and definitely proud of his vessel, immediately wants to correct this misinformation. "No, that's not right at all," he says. "Our propellers are actually ... double." And then he proceeds to give the actual dimensions, the actual capabilities, and often additional details about the submarine's performance that are absolutely classified. The Soviet operative nods, perhaps acts impressed, and the conversation moves on to other topics. The sailor thinks nothing of it. He was just correcting someone's mistaken impression. He was being helpful. He certainly doesn't think he just compromised national security. But that Soviet officer just gathered critical intelligence about American submarine capabilities without the sailor ever feeling like he was being interrogated or manipulated. Why this worked so effectively? The genius of this technique lies in understanding several key aspects of human psychology. First, people have an almost irresistible urge to correct misinformation, especially about topics they know well and care about. It's called the correction instinct, and it's deeply hardwired into how we communicate. When someone says something wrong about your area of expertise, you feel compelled to set the record straight. It's not just about ego, though that's certainly part of it. It's about establishing accuracy and demonstrating your knowledge. Second, when we correct someone, we don't feel like we're being interrogated or revealing information. We feel like we're being helpful and knowledgeable. Our psychological defenses don't activate because there's no perceived threat. A direct question like "How big are your submarine's propellers?" would immediately trigger alarm bells. Any sailor would know that's classified information and would refuse to answer. But correcting someone's mistaken statement feels completely different psychologically. Third, alcohol lowers inhibitions and makes people more talkative and less careful. The Soviets deliberately targeted sailors in bars and social settings where drinking was involved. Fourth, young people, especially those new to positions involving classified information, often haven't fully internalized security protocols. They understand intellectually that information is classified, but they haven't developed the instinctive caution that comes with experience. The bracketing technique. Soviet intelligence officers didn't rely on just one method. They had an entire toolkit of elicitation techniques. One particularly effective variation was called bracketing. This involved giving a range of values that the officer was fairly certain were incorrect. For example, instead of stating a specific wrong number, the Soviet operative might say, "I heard that American submarines can stay submerged for somewhere between 30 and 60 days before they need to surface." If the actual number was 90 days, the sailor would often correct them. "No, we can stay down much longer than that. We've gone more than 80 days before." The beauty of bracketing is that even if your range happens to include the correct answer, people will often still give you the specific number because they want to be precise in their correction. The disbelief method. Another powerful variation was expressing complete disbelief about a capability or achievement. A Soviet operative might say something like, "There's absolutely no way American submarines can dive deeper than 300 feet. The pressure would crush the hull. It's physically impossible." This kind of statement does two things. First, it challenges the sailor's pride in his vessel. Second, it frames the correct information as something the sailor needs to defend rather than protect. The sailor's response might be, "That's ridiculous. We routinely dive to 500 feet, and the submarine can handle depths beyond that if necessary." He just revealed classified operational capabilities because he felt like he was defending American engineering excellence, not compromising security. Beyond military targets, Soviet intelligence didn't limit these techniques to military personnel. They used them on defense, contractors, scientists, diplomats, and government officials. An engineer working on a classified aerospace project might be approached at a technical conference. A Soviet operativ, posing as a fellow engineer from a different company or country, might make incorrect statements about the technical challenges of the project. I imagine the biggest challenge with that type of system would be the heat dissipation. There is probably no way to keep the components cool enough at those speeds. The engineer, proud of the elegant solution his team developed, might respond, "Actually, we solved that problem by ... double quotes, and then describe the classified solution." The pattern was always the same. Make statements that are wrong enough to trigger correction, but plausible enough that the correction seems like a natural part of technical discussion rather than a security breach. The business intelligence application. As the Cold War progressed and the techniques became better understood, they started being used for corporate espionage and business intelligence. Companies would use elicitation to gather information about competitors' plans, products, and strategies. Let's say Company A wants to know when Company B is planning to release a new product. An employee from Company A at an industry conference or social event strikes up a conversation with someone from Company B and casually mentions, "I heard you guys are planning a product launch sometime in the second quarter, probably April or May. If the actual launch is planned for February, the Company B employee might correct them. Actually, we're launching much earlier than that. We're targeting February, but that's still confidential, so don't spread it around." Too late. The information is out. This same technique was used to gather information about pricing strategies, manufacturing capabilities, merger plans, and virtually any other competitive intelligence that companies wanted to protect. Why smart people fall for it? You might be thinking, "I would never fall for something like that. I'd recognize what was happening." But the evidence suggests otherwise. Even people specifically trained in counterintelligence fell victim to these techniques. The reason is that elicitation doesn't feel like manipulation when it's happening to you. It feels like normal conversation. It feels like you're being helpful or demonstrating your expertise or correcting misinformation. Our brains are wired to engage in these conversational patterns. When someone says something incorrect about a topic we know well, the urge to correct them is almost automatic. It happens before our conscious analytical mind even evaluates whether we should be sharing that information. Additionally, the information often comes out in small pieces. No single statement might seem particularly sensitive, but a skilled intelligence officer can piece together a complete picture from dozens of small details, gathered from multiple sources over time. The social engineering aspect, what made Soviet elicitation so effective, was that it was embedded in genuine social interaction. Soviet intelligence officers would spend months or even years building relationships with targets. They'd become friends, share drinks, attend social events together. By the time they started gathering intelligence, there was already trust and rapport established. The target didn't feel like they were talking to a spy. They felt like they were talking to a friend who happened to be curious about their work. This social engineering aspect is crucial. People are much more willing to share information with someone they like and trust, even if that information is sensitive. The Soviets understood that you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. They didn't threaten or coerce. They befriended and charmed. Modern applications, while the Cold War is long over, the techniques developed during that era are very much alive today. Foreign intelligence services still use elicitation to gather information from military personnel, defense contractors, and government officials. The settings might be different: LinkedIn instead of bars, industry conferences instead of Bangkok nightclubs, but the psychology remains the same. Corporate espionage continues to rely heavily on elicitation techniques. Companies lose billions of dollars annually to competitors who use these methods to steal trade secrets, product plans, and strategic information. Even in everyday contexts, savvy negotiators, salespeople, and journalists use variations of these techniques to gather information that people would unwillingly volunteer if asked directly. The defense against So how do you protect yourself against these techniques? The first step is awareness. Simply knowing that elicitation exists and understanding how it works makes you significantly less vulnerable. When someone makes a statement about your work, your company, or any sensitive topic, pause before you correct them. Ask yourself, do they really need this information? Why are they bringing this up? Is this a normal part of the conversation, or does it feel like they're fishing for something? The second defense is following the principle of need to know. Before you share any information, even in correcting someone, ask yourself if this person needs to know this information for any legitimate reason. Third, be especially cautious in social situations involving alcohol or when you're tired. These are the conditions where your defenses are naturally lowered and you're most vulnerable to manipulation. Fourth, be wary of people who seem unusually interested in the details of your work, especially if they're asking through statements rather than direct questions. Finally, if you work with classified or sensitive information, take your security training seriously. The reason you're told not to discuss work details isn't just bureaucratic paranoia, it's because these techniques are real and they work. The ethical implications, understanding elicitation, raises some uncomfortable questions about communication and manipulation. These techniques reveal something important about how human psychology works and how we can communicate more effectively. The same methods that Soviet spies used to gather secrets can be used by managers to understand problems in their organizations, by therapists to help clients open up, or by journalists to uncover important stories. On the other hand, there is something deeply manipulative about deliberately triggering someone's psychological responses to get them to share information they otherwise wouldn't. The line between effective communication and manipulation isn't always clear. Intent matters. Context matters. The nature of the information matters. Using elicitation techniques to help someone open up about struggles they're facing so you can support them is very different from using those same techniques to extract business secrets or classified information. The broader lesson. The story of Soviet elicitation techniques teaches us something important. We're all much more susceptible to social manipulation than we think. We like to believe we're rational actors who carefully control what information we share and with whom. But the reality is that our brains respond to social cues and psychological triggers in ways that often bypass our conscious control. A skilled manipulator doesn't need to threaten or bribe. They just need to understand psychology well enough to create situations where we voluntarily give them what they want. This doesn't mean we should become paranoid or stop having normal conversations, but it does mean we should be thoughtful about what we share, especially when it comes to sensitive information. The training that never stops. Intelligence agencies learned from their Cold War experiences. Today, security training for personnel with access to classified information includes extensive education about elicitation techniques. Military personnel, diplomats, and defense contractors are taught to recognize when someone is using these methods. They're trained to be cautious about correcting statements, especially from people they don't know well. But here's the thing. Even with training, these techniques still work. Human psychology doesn't change just because you understand it intellectually. The correction instinct, the desire to demonstrate expertise, the natural flow of conversation, these are deeply embedded in how we interact. Fighting against them requires constant vigilance. Why statements beat questions? The fundamental insight of elicitation is that statements are more powerful than questions when you want information from someone. Questions alert people that information is being requested. They trigger evaluation of whether that information should be shared. They activate defenses. Statements feel like conversation. They feel collaborative, they feel safe. And that's exactly why they're so effective at extracting information people would otherwise protect. Soviet intelligence officers understood this at a deep level. They knew that the way you frame a request for information is just as important as what information you are seeking. A direct question might get you nothing or a lie, but the right statement, delivered in the right context, would get you the truth without the target even realizing they'd given it to you. Legacy. The elicitation techniques developed and perfected by Soviet intelligence during the Cold War represent some of the most sophisticated understanding of conversational manipulation ever developed. These weren't crude interrogation methods. They were elegant applications of psychology that worked because they aligned with natural human behavior rather than fighting against it. The young sailors in Bangkok bars never knew they were targets. The engineers at technical conferences never realized they were being exploited. The government officials at diplomatic receptions never suspected the friendly conversations were intelligence operations. And that's what made the techniques so devastatingly effective. Today, these methods have spread far beyond intelligence agencies. They're taught in sales training, negotiation courses, and journalism schools. They're used in corporate settings, legal depositions, and everyday social interactions. The techniques that once helped the Soviet Union gather military secrets are now part of the broader toolkit of human communication and persuasion. If there's one lesson to take from the history of Soviet elicitation techniques, it's this. Be very careful about your instinct to correct people. That urge to set the record straight, to demonstrate your knowledge, to fix misinformation, it's one of your psychological vulnerabilities. And people who understand this can exploit it. The next time someone makes an incorrect statement about something you know well, especially if it relates to sensitive information, pause before you correct them. Ask yourself, why are they saying this? Do they really have this wrong? Or are they trying to get me to reveal something? Your instinct to correct might be exactly what someone is counting on. And remember, the most effective intelligence gathering doesn't look like interrogation. It looks like friendly conversation. The person extracting secrets from you might be the one buying you drinks and laughing at your jokes. The best defense is awareness. Now that you understand how elicitation works, you're significantly harder to manipulate. But only if you remember to use that knowledge when it matters.